And I am thrilled to have you here and to have you speaking really for the first time publicly about this whole experience. And I think there are so many questions. We want to make this next session as interactive as possible. So we're gonna open it up, and we'll open it up quick. But I want to start. Let's just start at the very beginning. You've now been in this role only a couple of months, but you get a call. Yep. I imagine. You're running Expedia, happily ensconced.
13 years.
In Seattle. Yep. And you get a call from whom I don't know, and you think what?
I think that this is a call that I want to completely ignore, originally. They call me, and it's the search and everything going on as it related to Uber at the time. It was this media circus that, honestly, I didn't want to be a big part of. And so I ignored the call. I've been called a bunch of times in the past, and I always say, I'm happy where I am. I've got the greatest boss in the world. I've got a terrific team, and I'm doing fine. I don't need to move. So originally, I ignored it, and then I had actually at the Sun Valley, at the big Allen & Company Sun Valley conference, I had drinks with a friend, Daniel Ek, who runs Spotify, and he asked me about it. He said, have they called you? Because I told them to give you a call. I said, yeah, but I ignored them. And he said, why the hell did you ignore them? I said, I'm happy. He said, since when is life about being happy? It's about doing something great. So I called them back, and I spoke to a few people on the board. I was really worried about all the leaks, et cetera, going on. So, and really happy that my name did not leak out there until the very end. And I went forward with the process, and at some point in the middle of the process, I decided to call Barry Diller, who is the chairman of Expedia and a mentor of mine for years, because I couldn't imagine his learning from the press before learning from me. So I told him. He wasn't happy about it, but he totally got it, and he was very supportive. And then one thing led to another. We had the conversations with the board, and I tell you, until that last weekend, for me, I kind of thought the whole thing was a lark, because you've got these giants of industry, who Jeff Immelt, Meg Whitman, et cetera, these capital names that they're talking to, and then there's this mystery candidate who's me, and basically I'm the only one who knows, and a couple of people who are really close in my life. So I honestly thought that I was just kind of a side hobby for the board, just in case. And the one person who always said that they would pick me was actually my wife, Sid, all along. She said, they're going to get you, they're going to get you. And I said, no, we bet $5, so I definitely owe her the $5.
But just help us understand the thought process and the process itself, because if you read the headlines during this period, there was a practical insurrection going on the board. There were scandals every which way. There was the Holder report. And you're thinking, well, what did you need to know before you took this job? And did you make any demands of them?
I did make certain demands of them, absolutely. Listen, what I knew is that this is an incredible brand and a terrific service. And I've seen that things are never as bad as the press makes them out to be, and they're never as good as the press makes them out to be. The public version of what's happening is often overkill and over-dramatized. To me, it's about, is this
Was this over-dramatized this time?
Well, maybe this one wasn't over-dramatized, but listen, to me, it comes to the product and the brand, and frankly, the product and the brand that this founding team, Travis and his founding team, have built is extraordinary. And the talent of the company is extraordinary, and the culture went wrong. And the governance of the company went wrong, and the board went in a very bad direction. But if the product is good, then if you can bring in good leadership and you can ultimately bring it together, and I think we're on our way. We're on our way. It's going to take a lot of work. But after 2 months, I feel better about where we are than, frankly, I was going in.
So what is your relationship like with Travis Kalanick?
It's a good relationship, but it's also, it comes with balance. And that what I told Travis very early on is that any new CEO needs space and needs distance from the old CEO. And so I told him very early on, Travis, to some extent I'm actually going to be pushing you away early on because I need my space. I need to be able to meet with a team. I need to be able to communicate with them so that they're just communicating with me and they don't have someone to go around if they don't like something that they've heard, et cetera. So you've got to let me engage with the team, engage with the company, engage with the culture. And I was a little worried about that conversation, but actually he took it really well. He took it really well, and he's been very respectful. And at the same time, he's been available to me whenever I've needed him. And I think we're going to go through a process where early on, I've got to put my stamp on the company. The new team has to put the stamp on the company. And over a period of time, I would be foolish not to use Travis's incredible genius and his knowledge that really was, largely responsible for getting the company to where it is now. So he's there when I need him.
How often you guys talk?
It depends. We'll talk, some weeks we won't talk, some weeks we'll talk 10 times.
Do you think he wants to be more part of this than he is?
I think so. Yeah, I think so. And he's made it plain.
How hard is that conversation to have with the founder of the company?
I think he understands the why, which is early on, I've got to have my space. I've got to be able to push the company, kind of write the company. And I think he respects that. Intellectually, he gets it. And he's been very plain with me that he wants to be involved with the company, and I've told him I want him involved with the company, absolutely, over the long term.
Okay, but there's a huge debate going on, and it's still going on this board. There's a lawsuit between Travis and one of the largest shareholders in this company, also on the board, about super voting rights, in part. And at some point, I imagine your interests or maybe diverging with his, or at least the interest that he thinks he has.
I think that is true of Travis's interests and potentially the larger shareholders' interests. Listen, when I got into this role, I didn't want to take sides. And the only thing that I was focused on, and I wasn't interested. You have meetings with certain parties and they tell you about stuff that happened in the past and stuff that they're emotional about. And everyone is, if you listen to one party or another party, they seem justified in their anger. And I've kind of told all the sides, I'm not interested in what happened in the past. I'm interested in the company and the employees and the brand and how we move forward. So I've tried to consistently play this role where I don't take sides. Don't tell me about what happened. Tell me about what we're going to do. And as it relates to governance, for example, we've taken some very, I think, positive actions as it relates to governance. Actually, the board itself and the high vote shares voted to get rid of the high vote shares and essentially get into a one share, one vote situation. We're reconstituting the board. It's going to be a big board, but that's okay. And I think step by step, we're preparing the company where you're going to have much, much better governance going forward, and you're going to ready the company for an IPO.
It feels, though, that there is still tension on the board, in large part because there's been an expected investment, as you know, from SoftBank. And part of that investment requires everybody on the board getting together. And that hasn't happened yet.
It hasn't happened yet, but it will.
Why? What's happening?
Because our making the changes in governance is unquestionably good because our bringing in SoftBank as a strategic investor at the right price would be a good thing. We've got to get to the right price, et cetera. And you're right, there's negotiations going on. They've probably taken longer than they should have, but we're going to get there because all the parties in the end, they know that this is a good direction to go in, and we just kind of have to badger our way.
But you do see the perspective, I imagine, of Travis's side, which is he's saying to himself, I'm the founder. I started this thing, and now I want to run this thing. And I have these shares. We agreed when we first started this thing that I should get more votes than everybody else. And now they're telling me that the thing that they agreed to isn't the deal that they agreed to. Yes,
but the high vote shares themselves as a class are voting, and Travis in the end agreed with the direction that we're going at. Listen, the fact is that I don't necessarily have anything against high vote shares, but there are many, many, many companies that have low vote shares, Amazon, Salesforce, et cetera, that make the kinds of long-term bets that you would want any company, Starbucks, to make, okay? So there's this reasoning behind high vote shares that I don't think actually is necessary in real life. And high vote shares work when the leadership and the high vote players actually are in concert. And you have two parties here who are far from being in concert and are shooting at each other. And to some extent, what I told the board is, if you're going to shoot at each other, at least let's shoot each other with conventional weapons instead of nukes. So let's get rid of the high vote shares. Let's become a great governance. Let's become a great example of strong governance. And let's move forward. This is not about control. This is about the company.
Okay, one more question on this particular topic, and then I want to go somewhere else, which is this. Tell us about the day that you learn that Travis wants to put 3 board members on the board and didn't tell you.
2 board members.
I'm sorry, I apologize, 2 board members. You put out a statement or an email to your staff calling this, quote, disappointing news and, quote, highly unusual. What was that day like? What was
it was disappointing and highly unusual.
Bring us inside the room.
It was, listen, it was a surprise. Now, the board members, the thing I was disappointed in is that the board members that Travis picked are actually great board members in terms of their resume, in terms of their background, and it put us in a weird situation because actually the subjects, the folks that he picked were great, but we didn't like how he got there. He had his own personal reasons. I don't want to recount them. He can recount his reasons. I think in the end it's going to be fine because Ursula and John aren't on the board because of Travis. They are because they picked him, but they're on the board because they're interested in the Uber situation. It looks like a difficult situation, and they think they can help.
What was the culture like going into this? And I wanted to ask you actually before you took the job, did you ask to read the Holder report? I mean, how much diligence did you feel like you needed to do?
I did not ask to read the Holder report. And listen, the Holder report isn't public, but I think a lot of the elements of the Holder report are out there. So I had read the Susan Fowler post, et cetera. I certainly knew the company by reputation. I looked at a bunch of the legal stuff that they were going through and the financial matters of the company. And the fact is that actually the company, despite all of the swirl around the company, has been operating at a very, very strong cadence. And what it needed was a culture reset. And that's something that I think I'm pretty good at. And that's something that, to me, seemed like a great challenge and a great opportunity.
Did you ever think about making the Holder report public?
Thought about it. But listen, the Holder report has a lot of details. And listen, it's details about behavior that to some extent has already been reported that is not excusable. But the Holder report is actually very detailed with lots of individuals, et cetera, who may not want their stories public. You know, they were interviewed, they were in situations, et cetera, and if they wanted their story to be public, they would have made them public. And I think from a material standpoint, it would create a bunch of sensational product out there, but it wouldn't change the story and it wouldn't change the direction that we're going in. And I think we've been very transparent as a company about what's going on at the company, where we are, and where we're going.
Okay, so where is the culture of the company now? You put out a value statement recently.
Norms, we call them.
Norms.
Behaviors, yes.
Which were in large part a repudiation of the culture under Travis.
I'd say yes and no. Yes and no. So there were certain cultural values at Uber having to do, you know, it's like toe-stepping, principle confrontation, et cetera, that meant well. Intellectually, you want to challenge your fellow employees to get to the right answer, but they were twisted into excuses for bad behavior and just being an asshole, right? And that did not work, even though that was not the intent of those cultural values. So we are very clear then in our new norms that that kind of behavior is not acceptable. At the same time, we carry through a number of values about acting like owners, making big, bold bets, ideas over hierarchy, a lot of ideas that were actually in the old culture of the company. Listen, the values of the company were different, they were interesting, they were not all perfect, But the fact is that it's those values that created the most highly valued private company in the world. So you don't want to take everything that brought Uber here and throw it away, because there's a huge amount of value and capability there. You want to get the best, take the best of what brought the company here, and then combine it with a new set of norms and a new set of behaviors to take us to the next step.
You've said that the next step, or the company has been relatively explicit, that the next step is an IPO eventually.
2019 is the target.
Travis used to say that he wanted to stay private for as long as humanly possible. Jeffrey Sonnenfeld was asking a question of Howard Schultz about the public versus private markets. Given all of the spotlight on you now, even as a private company, why would you want to be public?
I think you said it best. We have all of the disadvantages of being a public company as far as the spotlight on us, without any of the advantages of being a public company. So Travis and the whole board now agree that we should just go public. The numbers supported, the system supported, et cetera. And the fact is that if you set up the company in the right way, and you are honest and plain spoken to your investors about being a long-term player, about sacrificing short-term quarterly results for long-term gain, you will find that right set of shareholders who will support you.
Do you need to do that to get the capital that you need from companies like SoftBank?
Do what?
Go public?
No. No, I think the results of the company speak for themselves. And by the way, they can get better, and we can execute better. But actually, if you talk to SoftBank, they don't have any particular interest in going public. They are the ultimate long-term investor.
I have actually a quick SoftBank question. And I knew you were in Saudi Arabia 2 weeks ago, as was I. There was a fascinating article in the Times earlier this week by our tech columnist talking about really the idea of Saudi money, or potentially Russian money, or other money, foreign money, if you will, in the Valley. And how the Valley or corporate America should think about that. $45 billion of SoftBank's $100 billion comes from Saudi Arabia. There was an earlier investment made by Saudi Arabia. How do you think about that?
Well, first of all, I wouldn't commingle Saudi money and Russian money. They're different animals, right? And the Saudi money didn't come with any strings attached, other than the strings that any investor would have. And Yasser, who is on our board, has been nothing but a model board member whose sole interest is helping the company kind of get to the right stage of maturity, et cetera. Now, I wasn't there, but at the time when we took the money, because I asked the team about it, the company definitely talked about it. And I'd say that the most important issue for the company was the women's rights in Saudi Arabia. And actually, the company explicitly talked about how we actually believe that women should be able to drive. And since then, the changes that we're seeing, the cultural changes that we're seeing in Saudi Arabia, they are unambiguously positive, they're daring, but it certainly does seem like the country is moving in the right direction.
Let's talk about the operational business itself. And part of an IPO, I imagine, I don't know if you'll get there by then, but how do you make this company profitable? There has been an argument made over the years, given all of the capital that's come to you and so many of your competitors, that we are all having our rides home and elsewhere subsidized by the venture capital community, and that there may very well never be a day where the math actually adds.
That day is today, because the math is actually working in certain areas, in certain geographies. So if you look at the portfolio of the business, there are certain markets, such as the Asia-Pacific markets, if you look at Southeast Asia or India, where we are in heavy, heavy investment mode, and appropriately so. And we lose money. The bigger the company gets, the more money we lose, because we're actually subsidizing those rides. But we have been able to demonstrate a track record, and you've got to look in the numbers and look in the geographies where over a period of time we can pull back on the subsidies, and over a period of time get into a position of profitability on a geographic business. It doesn't happen everywhere, but I think that we can certainly demonstrate it.
What's the key and what's the time frame for that to happen?
It depends on the market, and it depends on the dynamics, the competitive dynamics in the marketplace. To some extent, the larger the market, the longer you want to subsidize that market, because the ultimate target as far as the rides market or the delivery market is so big that you want to actually juice that business. So it depends, and it also depends on the competitive nature of the business. And the US is very, very competitive right now between us and Lyft. So I don't see the US as being a particularly profitable market for the next 6 months. We'll see.
What happens after 6 months?
Depends on where the competition goes. Right now, we have a situation where a competitor, Lyft, is spending very, very aggressively in order to gain share.
How do you feel about drivers who really are your customer representatives? It's very complex. It's actually a very unusual situation, because even during this whole, what seemed like a crisis over the summer, I remember having a conversation with a friend about talking about it. This is one of the few businesses where the customer-facing element is actually doesn't technically work for the company. How do you feel about them more and more driving for Lyft? How do you actually create there's the culture at headquarters, but how do you create a culture to the extent you care about that? How do you even do that?
Well, listen, one of the core elements of our service is that you get to be your own boss. You get to do whatever you want. So would I rather not have them drive for Lyft? Sure. But actually, part of the service is that you get to drive for Lyft, or you get to drive for us, and you get to not drive if you don't want. That said, the company has definitely recognized that the driver is probably the most important element of the actual consumer experience. If we've got happy drivers, then our consumers are in cars, they're treated well, et cetera. So we have been on a program, a significant program, to consistently improve the driver's experience. We introduced tipping earlier this year. We've changed kind of how much drivers get paid for wait times, to the extent that a driver has to travel a very long distance and then gets canceled on at the last minute. We've adjusted the cancellation fee for those kinds of elements. So we've very programmatically gone through the driver experience. And if you look at the driver sentiment as it relates to Uber, it has been increasing dramatically over the past, I would say, 3 to 5 months. So it's working. They're hearing us. And they are a very, very important constituency for us, and we're going to pay a lot of attention to them.
What do you think the relationship should be between Uber and the drivers? I mean, there's been a larger sort of workplace debate in America, talking about employment even, and benefits and all of the things that come with that. How do you think about that?
The number one reason that our drivers tell us they love driving for us is because they're their own boss. So we have a model that works, that can create, because we don't have to have the overheads, et cetera, of pension, et cetera, we can actually deliver product at very low cost to the ultimate consumer. And the drivers like it. They don't want to be employees. I was talking to a driver who, in Seattle, was telling me how she comes early in the morning, and then she gets to go back home and drive her daughter to school, and then she does some eats pickups around that area. She has lunch with her friends, and then comes back to Seattle and drives. Like, that is the beauty of the model. They do whatever they want. So if it's working for consumers, low price, if it's working for drivers, and it's the number one reason why they like us, why change that?
What about regulators? Let's talk about London.
Sure.
You land in this job and literally you dive right into the pool. London effectively announcing that you're going to effectively be out of business.
There was some firefighting going on, yeah.
What happened, and where's this headed?
Well, what happened was that the TfL said that they were going to suspend our license, which was a big issue. We have a significant presence in London, and we have millions of consumers who depend on us in London. I flew over, and I met with Commissioner Mike Brown. The TfL had been very clear about their list of concerns, and I think we were guilty of not communicating, miscommunicating, answering partial questions, et cetera. I think we were generally immature in how we deal and dealt with regulators, and just being upfront about what's going on and what we can deliver and what we can't deliver. So we had dialogue with the commissioner. I think that there were certain things that he asked for, and I think we can deliver on those asks. And by the way, they're perfectly reasonable asks. It's not like they came out of nowhere. It's not like we didn't know about them. And our teams are working with theirs, and I hope and I expect, actually, that we will be in business in London for a long time.
When will you know?
That is out of my control. That depends on TfL, and it depends on their being satisfied with what we have to tell them. I think we'll get there, but it's going to be on their time frame, not ours.
And what about Brazil?
So Brazil was another. I think Brazil's a different situation, and that, first of all, our business in Brazil is enormous. We've got over 500,000 drivers in Brazil. We've got, I think, over 5 million users. So it is a very, very big business, and lots of people have come to depend on Uber at a time of extraordinary economic difficulty. The taxi unions are not happy about this. And the taxi unions sponsored a bill that was very problematic and that essentially was looking to license our cars as taxis are. And just some stuff did make sense. That is classic kind of taxi licensing. For example, if you have a license to drive from Sao Paulo airport into the city, you can't bring someone back. So then the rates from the airport to the city are really high because your utilization is insanely low. Our drivers can go both ways. The utilization is higher, prices come down. So regulation was fast-tracked to essentially license us like taxi companies. I went there and I talked with a number of government representatives. I think we made an effective case. I think they heard the voice of our drivers and consumers. And at this point, actually, the Senate passed the bill that we think was a good bill and a constructive bill, and now it's with the House, so we'll see.
How international do you think your business ultimately needs or has to be? Are there areas where you say, I'm going to scale back? Obviously, the deal was made with Didi in China.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. There are certain markets, if we can't win in a market or we can't be competitive in a market or can't be profitable ultimately, we'll pull back because we're not in this business just for fun. I think that China and Russia were two markets where our action in merging was appropriate. In almost every single other market that I'm learning about, and I'm just learning, it's only been 2 months, we are in a very, very strong competitive position. And to the extent that we have a competitor and we're spending the same amount, let's say in incentives, et cetera, and a competitor is spending the same amount, we tend to gain share because our product or brand or services are just better. That's a good position to be in.
What do you make of the sort of strange bedfellows or relationships? I'm thinking of your relationship with Didi, which also has a relationship with Lyft. I'm also thinking of Google, which has a relationship with you and Lyft, and also is
it's like a giant orgy.
And they're suing you.
Yes.
So what is the state of that?
The state of that is it's going to court, and as it relates to the suit, the damages claims that they have, I think, are highly questionable. I don't want to comment more on that, but the judge is certainly asking questions, and I think we're pretty confident in our position.
But do you talk to Larry Page? Do you talk to people? Because they do have they're invested in you too.
Yes, they are. They've got a very significant investment in us. But I think that the way that Google runs its investments arms are pretty independent of their operational arms, which is actually the right way of doing it. Otherwise, your investments tend to underperform.
What about all the money you're spending on autonomous driving? There is a huge question about whether you, dare I say, are just burning cash, and whether you should, some people say, and they say,
we're burning cash for good effect.
But that's the question.
Yeah.
Are you burning it for good effect, or could you effectively, in the future, just outsource it to to the extent that you can remake Friends with Waymo with them? So somebody else.
Our interest is in building a global ride-sharing network. It's not necessarily to manufacture cars one way or the other, autonomous or otherwise. At the same time, we want to make sure that we have availability to autonomy as it comes into the market. And right now, with the technology being as young, there are certain players who are interested in developing autonomy and operating a network, and there are certain players who just want to manufacture. So our investment in autonomy is one, in that we think it's a really, really interesting space that is worth a ton of money, and there's a lot of capital going in. The second is that we want to make sure that we have access to this technology as we build out the network. And the third is that actually building out autonomous technology and having a global network is a huge advantage. Because the issue with autonomy in any software is that you've got these edge cases, right? And so you're building software that solves 90% of the problems, but there are edge cases. Hey, I was in an Uber pool and went across the bridge and had to split a toll with my other riders, and I want a refund because I was unhappy with the service, and I want the refund of my ride and the third of the toll that I shared, right? We haven't built that yet. It's going to be a long time when we build that, and we have customer service folks who'll be like, hey, here's $2.99 back, right? That's how we deal with that edge case. With autonomy, the edge cases kill you, right? So you've got to actually build out for all the edge cases, which makes it a very, very difficult problem to solve. If you have a network live and you're developing autonomy, and I don't think this stuff is going to happen, it's not going to go from 0 to 1. There are going to be hybrid networks. You can answer certain calls. I'm going from A to B with an autonomous vehicle. The weather is good. The roads are mainline roads. There's no traffic. There are no accidents. That one can be, let's say, served by an autonomous vehicle versus another ride that will have to be served by a person. And you can, over a period of time, feather in autonomy into the network. And we are the only company in the world that has autonomous technologies that's as advanced as it is, with the opportunity to feather it in a live network and gather live data.
So where are you? So everybody thinks that Waymo, Google, has the premier technology right now. Where are you relative to what GM is doing, relative to all of the other players out there?
I am very confident that we are one of the top 3 players in developing autonomy. And I think that the Waymo case
has been,
I don't want to name names. And honestly, I don't know enough right now. But I'm very confident of the team. We've got cars out there now.
How quickly could you feather it in, as you say?
Stay tuned. Sooner rather than later.
Is that a year? If we were sitting here in a year from now?
I'm not commenting.
Okay. Let me ask you this, though, and it's really a question about employment, talking about playing for the long term. One of the great messages of Uber is this idea that you're creating employment and creating employment options for people. And you've gone to all sorts of jurisdictions all around the world and made that case. Mm-hmm. If your autonomous car works, it's going to become very complicated very quickly.
Yes, but you've got to look at the math.
If I was a driver,
you've got to look at the math.
What would you be telling me?
I would tell a driver, do your math. So right now, we account for far less than 1% of miles driven by car. There's, in the US, about 3 trillion miles driven. We're a fraction of 1% of that. So people think, wow, ride sharing, it's such a big business. It's actually a tiny, tiny part of overall driving. And until we become a real alternative to car ownership, I don't think we will have succeeded. So if that less than 1% goes to 10%, and it actually can, then you've got, let's say, a 10 to 20x volume and demand coming into these ride-sharing networks.
But everybody needs to be into the Uber pool. Nobody's sitting in the back seat.
Yes, yeah, you actually need multiple folks, et cetera. And you're never going to get to a position where 100%, not never, but in 10 years, you're not going to get into a position where I think 100% of rides are going to be served autonomously. Maybe it's 70%, maybe it's 80%. But there's going to be that 20% to 30% that will always need a driver, and that's going to be 20 or 30% in a 10x, 20x market. So 10 years from now, are we going to have more drivers than we do today? I absolutely think so.
Okay, final question for me, and then we're opening it up. Flying cars, when's that coming? You're investing in it. You just did it with NASA.
We are investing in it. Yeah, we are investing in it. It's going to be, I would say, in 5 years, you're going to see some flying cars out there.
Where?
There are cities that are knocking down on our doors wanting to get Uber networks out there. And what we're doing there is we're building the network. We've got incredible systems, et cetera. We're working with folks who are going to build skyports, et cetera. We're negotiating air rights. And then we want to work with all the manufacturers in order to develop these cars. And you can have a ride too. Push of a button. It's going to be awesome.
I want to open it up to questions. I know there's a number of important people here today. I want to start. I don't know where he is. There he is. Mike Isaac. I want to go to Mike Isaac first real quick from the New York Times. He has been covering this story. He's got his computer. He's been covering everything you've been saying. What have I missed, Mike?
Can you talk about Southeast Asia a little bit? I know you're fighting a bunch of competitors there, and think about like global strategy and how much cash you have to burn when you're fighting in a bunch of different parts of the world. So
he doesn't have a mic, so just the question is sort of how much money are you willing to burn in certain areas, and how are you thinking about that?
Yeah, so Southeast Asia is one of our most competitive markets. There are two players there. They're very, very strong players. And I think the difference in that market is that the players there are not just playing for ride sharing, but they're also trying to build out global payments platforms. So the economics of ride sharing, to some extent, they're subsidizing those economics to build a payments platform. I think from a pure ride sharing basis, we think our product is very, very competitive. But the economics of that market are not what we want to be. I think it's overcapitalized at this point. We're going in and we're leaning forward. But I'm not optimistic that that market's going to be profitable anytime soon.
Okay. There's a gentleman in the cheap seats in the back there named Barry Diller, and we want to get him a microphone. Can we do that? You have one.
Yes, Andrew. Now what?
So I want to ask you this, Barry.
Yes, sir.
He said he called you. What did you tell him?
Don't go. I said, look at how wonderful this place is, and there's still lots of challenges left.
It's true.
And after we talked for a few minutes, I said, you know, I can't stand in the way of this. It's too much of a big adventure. And so I did my best to help where I could and encourage, actually, him. But the great testament to Dara as an executive is that it took us about 90 seconds to decide on succession.
Yeah.
Because we had, and he had built such a great bench of executives that it was just absolutely not a missed step. And that is, I mean, the most important thing other than operating the company is to organize deep benches with real succession. And he did a fantastic job at that. So once that was assured, I kind of wished him well.
You just kind of wished him well?
More than.
I'm curious, though, had you been trying to, I don't know if you ever told him, did you ever think about, I need to have a successor because I may need to hit the exit?
No, Barry and I always, every 3 to 6 months, we just talk about the team. You know, and Barry's very, in the right way, involved with the team and engages with the team, and he would come to strategy sessions. And the team would just love it because there's this energy that Barry brings into the room that just lights up the room, and he pushes the team. So we'd always have chats after those sessions about the team, and it's just something that you do. It wasn't a formal process with the board, but it was constant informal process.
I mean, any
together.
company that doesn't do that, I would really worry about.
So would you invest in Uber?
Would I?
Yeah.
I was not given the opportunity.
Are you going to offer him an opportunity?
If you take it, sure.
It's you or Masa, Barry. Come on.
Oh, would I invest in Uber?
Yeah.
With him running it? Absolutely.
Okay. Fair enough.
Pass.
Just try me.
I want to open up to others. I just quickly, because you're here, Barry. Hold on. You still have the microphone. This is a totally different topic. I just want to congratulate you on behalf. No, I'm going to congratulate you on behalf of all New Yorkers on bringing that pier back. What's known as the Diller Island.
Thank you.
I saw you a couple months ago, and I was the day after it had seemed like it collapsed.
It did collapse, but reborn for New York, 2020.
Okay, Barry Diller, thank you.
Thank you.
Let's get some other questions. I see Chris Licht, the one and only showrunner of Late Night with Mr. Colbert.
I'm fascinated by
The Late Show.
I'm fascinated by the discussion about culture, and I'm wondering, what do you think? When did it go sideways in your forensics of what happened, and what can other companies learn about why it went so sideways? And as just a side note, if you could continue to work on the situation at Giant Stadium with Uber, Because after games, it's really like a third world.
Do we need Uber Air over there?
Yeah, I think you do.
Okay. So I think, I don't know exactly when it went sideways. One of the talks that I gave to the company are sometimes you can talk about culture, et cetera, but the fact is that everyone wants to play on a winning team. And I think that even if you have a great culture and you're constantly losing, you're not really going to love it. The magic is when you're playing on a winning team and you have a great culture. And at the same time, teams who win, sometimes the winning can hide rot that can happen in an organization. And I think that Uber was winning. And while it was scaling as a business, it wasn't necessarily scaling in terms of culture and scaling in terms of some of the executives there. And Travis tried to bring in some senior executives that just didn't work out. And I think winning gave some excuses for bad behavior. And it happened over a period of time. And by the time that it kind of became public, it was almost too late. And the thing that the company recognized and Travis recognized is that they needed to change, and they needed to change fast, which is why I think they ultimately decided that they needed a new executive in there.
Let's see if we can sneak in. We have a mic right up there.
When I get in an Uber car in New York, often I'll say to the driver, how's the Uber business? And more you hear, there are too many drivers in New York, I can't make a good living anymore. A driver this morning actually told me that some of the initial Uber drivers are dropping out. How do you respond to that?
There's always going to be supply and demand imbalances within the market, in that if there are too many Uber drivers, then people do drop out, and if drivers do drop out, then actually utilization goes up, and to some extent the marketplace takes care of itself. That said, I think that part of the issue is for us to be able to drive demand very aggressively in some of these bigger markets, and our share hasn't been what we want it to be. Ultimately, the demand has to be there, the consumers have to come back, and I think that we're in a better situation than we were 3-5 months ago. But our job is to reinvigorate the Uber brand, and as we reinvigorate the Uber brand and we bring in more business, we're going to have busier drivers.
Okay, let's sneak in one final question, if we could. I think we're running out of time. You're, again, in the cheap seats in the back, there.
So, this is adding on to what this gentleman just said. On the ground, what I'm hearing from Uber drivers is not a lot of happiness. And so I texted one of them, and he told me that when he started driving, Uber took 15% of his cash, and now they take 36%. And he said he has to really drive 8 hours a day to make $150, which doesn't sound that bad until you realize he's got to pay his car insurance, his TLC fees, the payments on his car. So the thing that I'm hearing is that, again, that a lot of Uber drivers are dropping out because they just can't make the finances work.
Doug Stumpf, one of the great editors of Vanity Fair.
Yeah, and so part of the issue as it relates to economics, especially in the US, is actually the cost of insurance. And a very, very significant, the biggest bite, kind of the biggest winner in this to some extent are the insurance companies. And that's just the reality of tort law, et cetera, and the cost of insurance in the United States. That's by far the biggest bite that goes out. And believe me, we're not making a ton of money here in the US off of the drivers. It is kind of the facts of the economics of the business. On average, in the US, drivers make significantly more than what you described that driver making. So there are some drivers where it may not be working, and there are some drivers that I talk to where it's working pretty extraordinarily. And we've got to get that right. But you're always going to have a 10% who are making a ton and unbelievably happy, and 10% where it's not working out when you have more than 2 million drivers. So we're going to do our best, and we're going to do our best to get this model working for all of our drivers.
Okay, Dara, we've just clicked on and tried to get you an Uber waiting downstairs for you. Thank you. Thank you very, very much
very
for
welcome.
this
My
conversation.
pleasure.
We all appreciate it. Dara, thank you. That was awesome. Thank you. We'll be back in just a little bit.
We will now have a short break. Please take this time to enjoy refreshments on this level. The program will resume in 15 minutes with Andrew Ross Sorkin, Kenneth Chenault, and Larry Fink on the economy, consumers, and redefining the long term.